For years, California lived with a fear that had no face. It moved quietly through suburbs and small towns, slipping through unlocked windows, climbing fences, and vanishing before the sun came up. People didn't know his name, didn't know his voice, and never saw him clearly. All they knew was that someone was watching them in their own homes. It began in the mid-1970s in Northern California. Families started reporting strange things, footprints in backyards, missing items that made no sense, doors found open in the morning. Then the real crimes started. Women were attacked in their bedrooms at night. A masked man would break in, usually through a window or sliding door, and wake his victims with a flashlight in their face. He tied them up, whispered threats, and disappeared into the dark. Police called him the East Area Rapist. He seemed to know everything. He knew the layout of houses, the schedules of families, which doors creaked, and which lights didn't work. Sometimes he would sit in the dark for hours, listening to people breathe, learning their routines before striking. Victims later said they felt someone watching them days before the attacks, like a presence they couldn't explain. What made it worse was how careful he was. He wore gloves. He left almost nothing behind. When police set traps, he avoided them. When neighborhoods organized night patrols, he simply moved to a new area. It was as if he could sense danger. Then the crimes changed. In Southern California, couples started being attacked in their homes. The same methods, the same timing, but now the victims were being murdered. Men were beaten or shot. Women were assaulted and killed. The press gave the killer a new name, the original Night Stalker. No one realized at first that it was the same man. He called victims months later, years later, breathing heavily into the phone, reminding them that he was still alive. Sometimes he whispered their names. Sometimes he laughed. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted control, even after the crimes were over. Entire communities lived in paranoia. People slept with baseball bats and knives beside their beds. Windows were sealed shut. Dogs were trained to bark at any movement. Parents checked on their children multiple times a night. But it didn't matter, he always found a way in. And then, suddenly, he vanished. By the mid-1980s, the attacks stopped. The killer disappeared as quietly as he had arrived. Some believed he had died. Others thought he had moved away or gone to prison for a different crime. The case went cold. Decades passed. Victims grew older. Some died without ever knowing who had destroyed their lives. The ghost had won. Until 2018. By then, technology had changed. Investigators had DNA from multiple crime scenes, but no match in criminal databases. So they tried something new. They uploaded the DNA to a public genealogy website, the kind people use to find long-lost relatives and family history. They weren't looking for the killer directly, they were looking for his family. The DNA matched distant relatives, cousins, great-uncles. A massive family tree was built. Slowly, one name stood out: Joseph James DeAngelo. A former police officer. A man who had once investigated burglaries. A man who lived a quiet life in a normal suburban neighborhood. When police began watching him, everything felt unreal. DeAngelo was in his 70s. He rode a motorcycle. He shopped for groceries. He argued with neighbors about trash cans and parking spaces. He looked like any other retired man. But they tested his DNA. It was a perfect match. On April 24, 2018, police surrounded his house. He was arrested in his driveway. Neighbors watched in shock as the man they had known for years was handcuffed and taken away. The monster that had haunted California for over 40 years finally had a face. In court, DeAngelo said almost nothing. He sat in silence while prosecutors listed his crimes: more than 50 rapes, at least 13 murders, countless burglaries. The courtroom was filled with victims, some in wheelchairs, some with gray hair, some who had waited their entire lives for this moment. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to explain why. It was only to plead guilty. There was no dramatic confession, no emotional breakdown, no apology that could undo the damage. The man who had terrorized an entire state for decades had nothing meaningful to say. The truth was worse than anyone imagined. The Golden State Killer wasn't hiding in the shadows of society. He wasn't a drifter or a criminal mastermind living off the grid. He was a husband, a father, a police officer, a man who enforced the law by day and broke it by night. He had lived a double life so ordinary that no one ever suspected him. And that was the most terrifying part, because it meant that, for over 40 years, the monster had been sitting next door.